At exactly 9:47 on a quiet Providence morning, the sound of polished shoes echoed across a marble courtroom floor. Not the sound of fear, not the sound of uncertainty, but the sound of someone who believed this room belonged to him. Marcus Delacroix walked into Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom, the way men walk into a private club they helped build. His Italian leather shoes shined under the courthouse lights. A platinum Rolex caught the sun like a silent reminder of power. Designer sunglasses rested casually on his head, untouched by the idea that a courtroom demands humility. This was not just another defendant. This was the mayor's son. For 8 years, the name Delacroix had shaped Providence politics campaigns, contracts, charity galas, ribbon cuttings. And Marcus had grown up breathing that influence, learning early that doors open faster when your last name carries weight. Behind the bench sat Judge Frank Caprio. No entourage. No wealth on display, just a lifetime of law patience and the quiet authority that comes from treating every person the same once they step inside his courtroom. When Judge Caprio offered a simple, respectful greeting, Marcus didn't respond. He scrolled on his phone instead. A calculated dismissal. A message without words. In that moment, the tension settled into the room like a held breath. Because this wasn't just about reckless driving. It wasn't just about damaged public property. And it certainly wasn't about a park ranger doing his job. This was about something older, deeper. What happens when privilege forgets its limits? What happens when someone raised above consequences finally collides with a judge who does not bend? Before we go any further, ask yourself this. Have you ever seen someone believe the law was written for everyone except them? Because what happened next inside this courtroom would not only shock Rhode Island, it would remind an entire nation what justice is supposed to look like. If you believe the courtroom is one place where names, money, and power should mean nothing, stay with us. This story is just beginning. Long before Marcus Delacroix ever stepped into Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom, the pattern had already been set. Marcus was raised in rooms where decisions were made quietly behind closed doors. Rooms where problems didn't linger, they disappeared. His childhood was filled with handshakes, donor dinners, and polite laughter that followed his father's name like a shadow. Being the mayor's son didn't just open doors, it erased boundaries. Burnside Park was supposed to be one of the city's calm places, a green space meant for families, joggers, and quiet reflection. At its center stood a public memorial fountain built to honor community service and shared responsibility. On paper, it symbolized stewardship. In reality, on that afternoon, it became collateral damage. Witness statements later described a luxury vehicle cutting through the park roadway, well above the posted speed limit. Tires squealed. Pedestrians froze. Water from the fountain splashed onto stone as the car clipped its edge, leaving visible damage to a structure maintained with public funds. Park Ranger Luis Rodriguez was on duty that day. New to city employment, earnest, trained to protect public spaces, not personalities. When he signaled for the vehicle to stop, he did what the city had asked him to do, nothing more. Marcus Delacroix stepped out of the car, already irritated. According to the ranger's report, Marcus didn't ask questions. He didn't listen. He laughed. The kind of laugh that tells you this conversation isn't happening between equals. When Rodriguez explained the violation speeding through a public park destruction of city property, Marcus waved him off as if brushing away an inconvenience. This wasn't a warning, it was a lecture. Marcus told the ranger his job was meaningless. He said city employees like him were replaceable. He explained slowly, deliberately, that he could make problems go away with a single phone call. Not a threat, he insisted later. Just education. Education in Marcus's world meant reminding people where they stood. The ranger documented the exchange carefully. He noted the vehicle damage. He noted the language. And most importantly, he noted the intimidation. Because when someone tells you they can erase your livelihood, context stops mattering. By the time the report reached the court, the charges were clear: reckless endangerment, destruction of public property, and intimidation of a public official. To Marcus, it was laughable. To him, Burnside Park was just a backdrop. The fountain was just stone. And Ranger Rodriguez was just someone who hadn't learned the rules yet. The real misunderstanding in Marcus's mind wasn't what happened. It was that the system dared to treat him like everyone else. That belief followed him straight into Judge Caprio's courtroom. As the bailiff read the charges aloud, Marcus didn't hear accountability. He heard inconvenience. He leaned back, confident that context, his version of it, would clean everything up. because for most of his life it always had. What Marcus didn't understand yet was this courts don't measure worth by donations. They don't calculate influence by campaign checks. And they don't recognize political realities as a legal defense. Burnside Park wasn't the beginning of his trouble. It was simply the moment his entitlement became visible on paper. And paper, unlike people, doesn't forget. The courtroom had seen difficult defendants before. Angry ones, defiant ones, even broken ones. But Marcus Delacroix brought something different into Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom that morning. He brought certainty, the kind that comes from a lifetime without consequences. As the charges were read aloud, Marcus barely listened. He shifted in his chair, pulled his phone back out, and began scrolling again. The glow from the screen reflected faintly on his face, a small but deliberate act of disrespect. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough to say, "This doesn't apply to me." Judge Caprio noticed immediately. "Mr. Delacroix," he said calmly but clearly, "put the phone away and address the court." Marcus looked up slowly, exhaling like a man interrupted mid-meal. He powered down the phone with exaggerated patience, then leaned back. "Can we make this quick?" Marcus said. "I've got a lunch meeting at the country club. Important people." The room froze. Judge Caprio had spent 3 decades watching how people reveal themselves under pressure. Some raise their voices, some hide behind lawyers. Marcus did neither. He spoke as if the courtroom were a minor inconvenience in a very busy life. "Mr. Delacroix," the judge replied, "this is a court of law. Your attitude is inappropriate." Marcus smirked. "Inappropriate, Judge. This whole thing is beneath my family." He began listing accomplishments no one had asked about. Charity events, donations, buildings bearing his last name. Each word landed like a reminder that in his mind, contribution erased accountability. Judge Caprio attempted to redirect him quietly, professionally, but Marcus cut him off. "Everything in this city has a bearing on my family," Marcus said. "The hospital wing, the coffee, the contracts." "You don't think that matters?" The audacity settled into the air like smoke. Judge Caprio straightened slightly. "Your family's contributions have no bearing on these charges." That answer only seemed to amuse Marcus. "Come on, Judge, let's be realistic." Without permission, Marcus stood up. He began pacing. Every step across the courtroom floor was a test, not of law, but of dominance. He spoke about political realities, about leadership stability, about how inconvenient prosecutions could ripple through contracts and partnerships. When Judge Caprio ordered him to sit, Marcus ignored it. "I'll sit when you start showing proper respect for my family's position," he said. "My father has been mayor for 8 years. Do you really think the people benefiting from that care about some traffic incident in a park?" This wasn't a defense. It was a warning. Judge Caprio had seen intimidation before, but rarely this naked. Marcus wasn't pleading innocence. He was negotiating power. "Mr. Delacroix," the judge said firmly, "you will sit down immediately or be held in contempt." Marcus laughed. "Contempt? Judge, how long do you plan on keeping this job?" "My father's not going anywhere. The council supports him. The unions support him. You sure you want to make this difficult?" The courtroom could feel the shift. This was no longer about reckless driving or a damaged fountain. It was about whether the authority of the court could withstand open challenge from political bloodlines. Marcus stepped closer to the bench. "Look," he said, lowering his voice. "We both know how this ends. A fine. Maybe some community service at one of our charities. Let's not pretend this is something it's not." Judge Caprio leaned forward slightly, his expression unchanged. "Return to your seat, now." Instead of listening, Marcus pressed on. "This is about respect," he said, "and right now you're disrespecting the office of the mayor." In that moment, the courtroom wasn't watching a trial anymore. They were watching a collision. Power, convinced it was untouchable, walking straight toward a line it believed didn't exist. And Judge Frank Caprio, calm, unmoving, was the only thing standing in its way. There are moments in a courtroom when time seems to hesitate, when everyone present senses that something irreversible is about to happen, but no one yet knows how far it will go. Marcus Delacroix took 3 slow steps toward the bench. Not rushed, not angry, certain. Judge Frank Caprio did not raise his voice. He did not reach for the gavel. He simply leaned forward, his eyes steady, his posture unchanged. In that silence, the contrast was unmistakable. One man accustomed to power without limits, the other bound to power by restraint. For a fraction of a second, they stood there. Privilege and principle, arrogance and law. Then Marcus crossed the line. He spat. The saliva arced through the air, catching the light from the courthouse windows before landing on Judge Caprio's left cheek. It slid downward slowly toward the collar of his robe. No gasp, no scream, no movement. 5 seconds passed. They felt endless. The bailiff's hand hovered near his radio. The court reporter froze, fingers suspended above the keys. In the gallery, people sat motionless, unsure whether what they had just witnessed was real. Judge Caprio reached calmly for a tissue. He wiped his face with deliberate care. No rush, no anger. His eyes never left Marcus. When he spoke, his voice was steady, controlled in a way that carried far more weight than shouting ever could. "Mr. Delacroix," he said, "you have just assaulted a judicial officer in open court." The words settled heavily. Marcus seemed to falter for the first time, but instinctively his arrogance reached for familiar armor. "What are you going to do?" he scoffed, though his voice wavered. "Fine me. My allowance is more than your annual salary. Jail. My father will have me out before lunch. He'll call the governor, they play golf together." There it was again, the belief, the shield. Judge Caprio stood. In 30 years on this bench, he had never stood during a defendant's hearing. Everyone in the room felt the significance instantly. "I have seen angry defendants," the judge said. "I have seen frightened defendants. But I have never seen someone so detached from reality that they would assault a judge and then explain why it shouldn't matter." Marcus tried to laugh it off. "Assault over some spit. That's ridiculous." "You spat in my face," Judge Caprio replied evenly. "In a courtroom, in front of witnesses. That is assault on a judicial officer, and it is a felony." The word felony landed hard. Bailiff Williams stepped forward at the judge's signal. "Place Mr. Delacroix in restraints," Judge Caprio ordered. "He is officially in custody." The confidence drained from Marcus's face. He stepped backward as the handcuffs came into view. "You can't arrest me," he shouted. "Do you know what this will do to my father's administration? The media will destroy him." As the cuffs closed around his wrists, Marcus's voice rose into panic. "I demand to call my lawyer. I demand to call my father. This is illegal." Judge Caprio cut through the chaos with clarity. "For 15 minutes, Mr. Delacroix, you have operated under the belief that your father's position grants you immunity. You threatened a public official. You disrespected this court, and now you have committed assault." Marcus struggled, his words tumbling over each other. "My father built this city. He'll have you removed from the bench." Judge Caprio did not flinch. "Your father built his career on promises of accountability," he said. "Today, you're going to discover whether those promises were real." As Marcus was escorted toward the exit, the last of his certainty shattered. "This is a setup," he shouted. "You're destroying my family." Judge Caprio's reply followed him down the aisle. "The only person destroying your family's reputation is the one in handcuffs." The doors closed behind Marcus Delacroix, and with that sound, something else closed too. The illusion that power could spit in the face of justice and walk away. By the end of that day, the story had already escaped the courtroom. Local news broke into regular programming. Headlines flashed across television screens. Radio hosts replayed the moment again and again, careful with their words, but stunned by the reality. A mayor's son, a sitting judge, a courtroom crossed in a way few Americans had ever witnessed. Justice once quiet had become unavoidable. 7 days later, Marcus Delacroix returned to the same courtroom, but the man who entered was no longer the one who had walked out in handcuffs. The designer suit was gone. The Rolex was gone. The posture once inflated with entitlement now sagged under the weight of reality. He wore a standard county jail jumpsuit slightly loose on his frame. His hair was unstyled. His eyes no longer scanned the room for allies. For the first time, Marcus looked small. Behind him sat Mayor Vincent Delacroix. The most powerful man in the city did not speak. He did not nod. He did not reach out. His face was set in quiet disappointment, the kind that doesn't fade with time. Judge Frank Caprio took the bench with the same composure he always had. "Mr. Delacroix," he said, "you've had 1 week to reflect on your actions. Do you have anything you'd like to say before sentencing?" Marcus stood slowly. His voice was low, measured, almost fragile. "Your Honor, I want to apologize. To you, to this court, to my father, and to the people of Providence. What I did was wrong. I believed I was above consequences. I was wrong." Judge Caprio studied him carefully. 1 week ago, the judge said you told this court your father's position made you untouchable. Do you still believe that? "No, Your Honor." "What changed?" Marcus hesitated, then spoke honestly. 7 days in jail. 7 days with people whose lives were destroyed by corruption, by favoritism, by people who thought the rules didn't apply to them. I realized I was becoming exactly what's wrong with this system. The courtroom remained silent. Judge Caprio nodded once. "Your actions were not just disrespectful," he said. "They were an attack on the principle that justice applies equally to everyone, especially those with power." Then came the sentence. Marcus Vincent Delacroix, You are sentenced to 2 years in state prison for assault on a judicial officer. Marcus inhaled sharply. I am suspending 18 months of that sentence on the condition that you complete 1,000 hours of community service with the public defender's office representing people who have no money, no connections, and no voice. Relief flickered across Marcus's face, but it did not last. You will also write a public letter of apology. Judge Caprio continued to be published in the Providence Journal, explaining how privilege without responsibility corrupts both the individual and the system. This was not punishment for spectacle. It was punishment with purpose. You entered this courtroom believing your name placed you above the law, Judge Caprio concluded. You leave knowing that real honor comes from serving justice, not escaping it. In the front row, the mayor finally spoke. Witnesses later recalled his words were simple. I'm proud of the sentence, he said quietly. It's what my son needed. And in that moment, justice did something rare. It didn't just condemn power, it corrected it. 6 months passed quietly. No cameras followed Marcus Delacroix anymore. No headlines tracked his movements. The noise that once surrounded his name faded, replaced by something far less comfortable: ordinary accountability. Inside the public defender's office, Marcus learned what privilege had once kept hidden from him. He met people who worked 2 jobs and still couldn't afford bail. He listened to mothers who had missed court dates because they couldn't find childcare. He watched attorneys fight tirelessly for clients who would never make the evening news, whose names carried no weight beyond their own survival. For the first time, Marcus wasn't being protected by power. He was witnessing its absence. Hours turned into weeks. Weeks into months. The arrogance that once defined him had nowhere to hide in rooms filled with human consequences. By the time he completed 300 of his required 1,000 service hours, something had shifted, not dramatically, not theatrically, but deeply. Justice, he learned, was not about winning. It was about responsibility. His public letter appeared in the Providence Journal on a Sunday morning. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't polished. It acknowledged a truth many never admit, that privilege without restraint poisons both character and institutions. The letter quickly found its way into classrooms, eventually becoming required reading in high school civics courses across the city. The mayor faced his own reckoning. Vincent Delacroix stood before voters months later, not as a man asking forgiveness, but as one standing by a hard decision. He refused to interfere. He refused to deflect. And in doing so, he proved something rare in public life, that leadership means allowing consequences even when they hurt the people you love. He won re-election, not because of power, but because of integrity. Judge Frank Caprio returned to his bench as he always had. No victory lap, no commentary, just the quiet continuity of justice applied evenly. The only visible reminder of that day was a small sign placed near the bench, one that spoke louder than any sentence ever could. Justice is not about who you know. It's about what you owe to the community you serve. The courtroom moved on. The city moved forward. But the lesson stayed. Marcus Delacroix walked into court believing strength came from exemption. He walked out understanding that real strength comes from accountability and from choosing to serve rather than dominate. In the end, the act meant to show ultimate disrespect became the moment that redefined respect itself. If this story made you pause, share it with someone who believes power should never place anyone above the law. If you believe justice should correct, not just punish, leave a comment below. And if stories like this remind you why Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom matters, subscribe for more moments where accountability, dignity, and compassion meet. Because justice doesn't ask who your father is. It asks who you choose to become.